Charles, the hits just keep coming with Kamala Harris as far as being about as stupid as it's possible to be. How are you?
Well, I'm great, Jason, and I want to lay down some new ground rules. I'm running for president, and I'm not going to have an interview. I'm not going to give an interview, a live interview, for weeks. And when I do, I pre-tape the interview. I'm going to insist that you cut out 60% of the really atrocious stuff and only put the stuff in where I shoot myself in the head. I
Oh,
mean, that's in essence what this dunderhead has done. I mean, the most important job Obama said was picking his vice president, right? So he picks the dunderhead, crooked dunderhead, Joe Biden, and expects us now to remember Barack Obama through eternity as a magic genius when he's a moron and a dangerous moron at that. Here, Kamala Harris, I don't know how long she was anointed in the highly democratic process of not participating in not winning a single vote in a primary. She's anointed president, presidential candidate. So she hires a crook and weatherman, Eric Holder, to be in charge of vetting the vice president and comes up with the biggest fucking loon in Minnesota who is so bad that apparently polling has now come out that the Biden-Harris administration or whatever standing is lower now that Walz has been selected. Then, on the one hand, saying in the beginning of the Biden administration that what's her name, Harris, would be the last person that Biden consulted on any major decision. Now they're trying to walk that back after the Afghanistan fiasco, where women are now, kept in the basement in Afghanistan, are not allowed to go to school. This is a great advocate for women, Kamala Harris, and people of color. The place is one of the largest vendors of military equipment, all left behind by these thieves, Biden and Harris. They now try to claim that Harris didn't participate in that decision. Well, which is it? You're either joined at the hip, almost, which is a scary concept in thinking about each of them, or you're not. And then on the third anniversary of this fiasco, they try to diss Trump for accepting a request to go to this Arlington and lend the considerable moral and other support that he can do to these aggrieved families. They diss him, they lie about him. And now Walz, when confronted, Walz, a man who credibly stands accused of stolen valor about lying in all important aspects of his military and political career, he gets confronted to be asked what's going on with all this, and he just ducks the question. This is unacceptable. And unfortunately, it's unacceptable from the right. But unfortunately, or fortunately, I would say for Trump, and unfortunately for these guys, the pro-Palestinian hard left is now going after Walz and Harris for their support of Israel following this latest murder of 6 hostages. So they're taking it all sides. And this manufactured puffery that Kamala had a superb convention that the polls are showing her winning. These are like, she can't even get a commanding majority of people she's polling who are all for her. You know what I mean? They're oversampling Democrats. They're undersampling Trump supporters. They're undersampling true independents. And on the independent front, you have people as diverse as RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, both now going all in for Trump in very creative ways. RFK with his Make America Healthy Again, which is, I think, a great thing to run. How can you be against that? Well, ask Chris Christie about that, or ask Letitia James. But, this is on substance. If the election were to be held today using hand-counted true ballots, fairly counted, this would be, I think, a landslide victory for the Trump, Vance, Kennedy, Gabbard America ticket, in which it's likely that Harris and Walz will do worse than McGovern did in whatever election that was, where he got like just a handful of votes, electoral college votes. I mean, this team is just, it can't run its own campaign. How the hell is it going to extract us from the message that Harris created? And why would you ever hire someone? Say, have you ever had a project? I had it when I did my big project in upstate New York. I had a fine builder, but he was used to customers who just didn't care how much things cost. And when I put him on a budget of X, and we were almost 2X, and we weren't done with the project, and I come into like a small room in this house, he's down on his knees, sanding the knees, and he looks up at me after I've told him, his name is Fred. I said, Fred, we got a problem here with the money. He goes, hey, Charles, look at the floors. They're bitching, man. Bitching floors. I said, Fred, you're fired. Now, you're fired. I mean, I would never hire, but I, out of courtesy, gave him a chance to bid. I put finishing the whole big project out to bid. And the spectrum was his high bid was 3 times the low bid and 2.5 times the bid that I accepted.
Jeez.
Why would you ever, knowing what we know about Biden and these, he goes to the convention, he's there like he's, Stockholm syndrome prisoner at the convention. They wind him up, he's got a problem staying up past 6:30 without a Girl Scout troop there to, rub his back or worse. And they put him on at almost midnight. And in the speech, which will go down, it was not going to be there, the Gettysburg Address and Biden's speech at the Democratic National Convention. I don't think so. You're gonna have Shebang from William Hung at America's Got Talent will be remembered long after everyone forgets Joe Biden's name. But he gets up there and he says, I'm not done yet. I got 6 more months, and then he promptly goes on vacation. First to California, with his wife, who's a moron.
Yeah.
Right? She has to know how deeply demented Joe is. Forget about the argument that Kamala has to know. Jill has to know that this man is a cipher, and a tiny percentage is left of his brain and his judgment. And yet she's still playing the part, flying private on big jets with security details. She goes on this shopping spree or shopping trip with her I guess it's stepson Hunter, and they push residents of this Tony part of California out of the way, very rudely and on tape, so that Jill Biden can have yet another shopping spree and yet another vacation. Now they're down at this stupid ass beach in Delaware, which, I don't particularly like Delaware. Maybe Rehoboth Beach is nice, but I don't think it's as nice as Maui. Certainly is not as nice as where I am. And this idiot's under an umbrella like that. And there's a picture of him, sleeping on his back like a fucking beached whale in the middle of rising, tensions in Russia, Ukraine, in the middle of what's going on in the Middle East, in the middle of what's going on in the South China Sea. This is our president. This is the image we want to convey to the world. The man, I question, A, whether that's really Joe Biden, and B, what the hell? Can the guy even sign his name, let alone read a briefing paper anymore? And what the hell is Kamala doing? Right? Is she off? Is she helping to run the country, or is she campaigning? She certainly she can't do either job well. She's certainly not doing both well. So who the fuck is running the United States right now?
It's amazing, Charles. Let me ask you a serious question about her interview with Dana Bash or Dana Bash. I don't want to be racist. I'm pretty sure she's a woman, but nobody knows how to say her name. Kamala screwed it up several times. You would think there would be some degree of preparation, right? I think even if I asked you without preparation right now, in a hypothetical scenario where you became president, what you would be focused on doing the first day, I think within a matter of the amount of time it would take for you to start speaking, you'd formulate some idea related to finance or whatever, some sort of hypothetical idea that would be your first day thing. She goes into all this. What did you think of her answer to that question? It kind of seemed very unprepared.
It's non-responsive. This is what you see here is what you're going to get. What you see now is better than what you're going to get if, God forbid, she becomes president. And this, I think, does resonate for me. There was a criticism when the progressives were trying to get rid of her, and they started leaking stuff from her staff to the New York Times and elsewhere. There was a piece that said that spotlighted the very high rates of turnover on Kamala Harris's staff, and the fact that she's in that box you don't want to be in that 4-box thing, the BCG box: high intelligence, low intelligence, high arrogance, low arrogance. She's high arrogance, low intelligence, and as such, according to this report, does not prepare for meetings and just wings it. That's her whole life. She wings it when she's not down on her knees trying to get ahead. I mean, this is this is pathetic, and the team around her is pathetic. I mean, Eric Holder. We talked about him in the past, but Eric Holder belongs in prison for what he did in Columbia when he was in law school there. I think, storming the president's office and in effect holding it hostage, et cetera, and then going on a long crime spree with a law degree, including allowing all those people to be pardoned at the last minute when Bill Clinton left in disgrace in 1991, in January 2001. People forget that yes, Mark Rich was bad, but somebody who was worse than that is Susan Rosenberg. You want to talk about insurrection, you want to talk about violence, you want to talk about unrepentant criminality. That's Susan Rosenberg, who was tied into that Act Blue exercise. And so anyway, she, of all people, this idiot bird brain Harris, decides that the right person to vet top-level candidates for her cabinet, including Walz, is this idiot Holder. So Holder's a moron, trying to advise a moron. Now they've picked a moron. They're talking about having other morons in the cabinet, and they can't even put together one live interview. Right? I mean, imagine if you were trying to run Crowdsource the Truth, and all of your guests said, you know what, Jason, I insist on having my team review every video, and we have the right to cut out as much of it as we want after the fact. Would you do that? I would.
Well, and then they would also demand that you put a little live bug on there to deceive people into thinking that it's live. It was just fundamentally dishonest. And it's funny, Charles, because, they keep trying to take Crowdsource the Truth off of whatever, whether it's YouTube or Facebook and all this disinformation and everything, but they've never been able to prove anything that I've said to be incorrect. Well, maybe I've been incorrect, but I'll correct it, but they've never proven that I've deliberately said something that was false, whereas that seems to be kind of all they do.
Well, I like to draw what I believe is an important distinction. When it comes to news, you're supposed to be reporting facts based on evidence. That's news, not propaganda. And you can make honest mistakes trying to report the news. I mean, you could be sitting there, the President of the United States can stand up, or the Vice President of the United States can stand up at an important press conference in Washington, D.C. and say the United States values its long and important alliance with the government of North Korea, which is something that Kamala Harris actually said in a press conference and kept on talking and didn't correct herself. So what are you supposed to do as a news person? You can report what she said, and that's provably false. You can report it and say, well, she said this, but she meant to say something else. Or you can have your analysis group, your punditry group, stand up and say, see, let's play a drinking game. You have to drink, and you can't do a whiskey because you kill somebody with this drinking game, but take wine and mix it with, let's say, 1 part wine and 8 parts water or 7 parts water. And every time Kamala Harris lies, you have to drink, let's say, 1 ounce of wine. You'd be drunk after 15 minutes because the woman always lies about every aspect of her career. She selected a lying running mate. So, when it comes to the analysis side, it's important to encourage people to express opinions as they see it from their perspective. And even if they're wrong, wholly wrong, that can advance the scientific inquiry process, right? If you have an opinion and it's wrong, that can prompt somebody to say, Charles is wrong for these 15 reasons, and now I see how to unlock this problem, right? So that's why the First Amendment is so important. This idea that that there's only one answer, and it's the progressive answer, or it's the communist answer, or whatever, and that if you disagree with that answer, you need to be canceled, you need to be out of power, you need to be humiliated. This is rubbish. And the people who espouse that need to be dealt a very tough lesson that you can't silence your political opposition, which is what Obama wants to do, which is what that midget Robert Reich wants to do. And I think you should pronounce it Reich, not Reich. Robert Fourth Reich.
Yeah.
And Hillary Clinton and the others who are all in for labeling opinions they dislike as disinformation and then seeking to cancel or limit their influence. This shit's got to stop.
Absolutely. Speaking of Clintoons, Charles, I've been dealing with some Looney Tunes myself.
Yeah, I mean, it's against my own interest to suggest that maybe the cartoon animation side deserves more capital investment. Maybe you can go get a small business loan from Kamala Harris.
We do have to talk, Charles, about the incredible oppression of free speech that's happening sort of through Brazil. Everybody's acting like, oh, Brazil, this judge. In my view, Charles, I see basically the same apparatus that started to rear its head around the 2020 election that gave rise to the whole, Twitter files and everything suppressing the Hunter Biden laptop. It's still amazing to me that people haven't brought, I think, as much attention as is needed on the Twitter coup. Nobody's talking about Barack Obama or Adam Sharp's role in this or Valerie Caproni's role in all of this. It's really kind of amazing. But, Brazil has taken center stage. A good question that's being asked is, why the State Department hasn't said or done anything. Brazil is obviously going to be uninvestable if people feel, as you've pointed out in the past, that putting your money there, they could just close the account of some other business that you're invested in. They shut down Starlink because they don't like what Elon Musk is doing with X. Two unrelated companies, pretty bad. But really, it's the U.S. State Department, I think, motivating it through Brazil.
Well, that's what I'm reading about, that apparently the campaign to cause Bolsonaro to lose re-election was a campaign that was orchestrated by our State Department and possibly funded by U.S. taxpayers.
Boozy was all over it. And I couldn't believe it. I said, what does Chris Boozy know about politics in Brazil? It's absurd. I could tell they were messing around with that election.
Right. And well, look, what election in recent history hasn't been messed around with? We go back to Obama, and I think Obama is now up on a soapbox. Remember, prior to Obama, former presidents would shut their pie holes. They would just go off and do something different. And, as in George Bush's case, I guess he's actually a pretty good watercolor painter. But, go do something different. Barack Obama never left Washington, D.C. With the money that he had saved from investing so shrewdly and living so, close to the bone. I'm kidding, of course. The man goes out. One mansion in Chicago on 2 lots is not enough for him, so he buys a big one in Washington, D.C., I think in the suburb area called Panorama, which is very ritzy, I'm told. Then another expensive place out there in Martha's Vineyard. Then his supporters buy him another place in Hawaii. I think it was the Magnum estate, the Magnum PI estate that they bought for him. I could have that wrong. Yeah. And, this guy has been meddling nonstop. And the mainstream media collaborated in an exercise to refuse to investigate whether Obama was legitimately eligible to hold the office of president. There never was a serious investigation of that conducted in the mainstream press, not once. Instead, they came up with this tactic of coming up with something that sounds like an illness and saying anybody who wants to bring this up is, quote, a birther. No. People are asking legitimate questions about, and the framers of the Constitution were concerned at the time they put it together, that the British would meddle in the affairs of the United States of America and insinuate somebody who was loyal to Britain and disloyal to the United States of America into the position of President of the United States. That's what the framers were concerned about. Might that be what had happened in say, 1992 with Bill Clinton? Might that have been what had happened with George W. Bush and then with Barack Obama and now with Joe Biden? Might the framers have been pretty fucking smart And might Britain not be the America's closest and dearest ally anymore? You look what's going on in London and across the countryside in Britain right now. That country is a place I'm scared to revisit for my personal safety. Just walking around London, it's dangerous.
As is New York.
Well, yeah, I left there.
Exactly. And so I mean, Charles, it's just amazing that they're thinking she's going to win. Laura, I'm pretty sure, broke this story, sort of contacted Tim Walz's brother or put out some kind of thing that he responded to, and then the Post picked it up and ran with it. But his own brother came forward and said, look, this guy's an idiot.
Again, that's true. I think we can discern that just from looking at Walz and looking at his own record. And now there's tape of him, where he claimed that he never said that he served in Afghanistan. Now there's videotape of him saying, when I was in Afghanistan. So, before we get to the brother, Walz is manifestly incompetent and a danger to the state of Minnesota and certainly to the country of the United States. When we think about brothers and sisters and what they could say about siblings, I mean, we look at, for example, Mary Trump, who is, I guess, Trump's niece, and we see an example of a bitter and twisted relative who's just trying to make life miserable for Donald. And we look at Barack Obama's half-brother living on a cardboard box there in Nairobi for a time. Again, there's personal animus there. So I think it's a good thing, and it's more powerful, frankly, the Megyn Kelly sit-down that's happening imminently or may have already happened over in New York, where she's got people who served with Walz in his units explaining what it was like what he was like back then. That, to me, is more powerful than the brother story, although the brother story is certainly not helpful to a mortally wounded campaign, and they still have the most important part of it to get through. I mean, the campaign officially starts on Tuesday, your time. This is all the prequel. And they're just...
What do you mean it officially starts? I don't understand.
That's just by tradition, the campaign, there are endless discussions and, yes, they're shadowboxing right now, but by tradition, the heart of the campaign is deemed to be the day after Labor Day forward. And that's when pollsters start doing real polls, where, again, by tradition, where they think about the Electoral College, they try to sample in each state, they try to obtain samples of likely voters, not people with opinions, but likely voters, and say, in Texas, what is the composition of Texas? What percent is conservative? What percent is Country Club Rhino? What percent is moderate Democrat? What percent is progressive Democrat? And what percent of the whole pie are independents? You got to do that state by state. And if you do it nationally, you can turn Texas blue by oversampling blue Democrat nationwide and claiming that would hold up in a place like Texas where it's not going to. So those kind of polls don't really come out. And now you have people, I think, on the left have seen enough of this faker. And you go on your Twitter feeds, go on various other places, and you'll see man on the street interviews around the country of black people, for example. And maybe that's all staged by Trump, but I don't think so. And it is not, you're not seeing the support of those man on the street interviews for Harris, either from blacks, or more specifically from black women. So that's on, the support, overwhelming support for Harris and Walz, I think, is sold by the people who have so much to lose in legacy media. I mean, I wouldn't want to be an investor in legacy media right now, particularly because most of these legacy media operations have a lot of debt on them.
Right.
And, the top line numbers, the subscriber counts have got to be falling. I don't think
they have
you can
massive
raise subscription rates.
Massive overhead and everything, large salaries to pay all their staff. They just can't compete with the newer competitors that are coming up and individual stars like Megyn Kelly and Tucker Carlson, who just go off and start their own show, almost become like a competitive network. But Charles, we're about to go into the First Amendment forum where people are going to be able to retain their right to listen to what we want to talk about. And unfortunately, this is the situation that we're in 2024 in Joe Biden's America. But I do want to thank people who've been sponsoring the show, making it possible. You're going to be able to join us on odyssey.com/@crowdsourcethetruth, crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com, and subscribestar.com, and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Thanks, everybody.